Welcome back to Tacos and Trends, the podcast by Made Trends, where we explore the intersection of culture, consumer behavior, and the trends shaping tomorrow. You're listening to The Future is Fractional, a limited series that explores how powerful women are reshaping the C-suite, offering practical, unfiltered insights for growth-minded founders. This week, we're diving into the legal side of leadership when a general counsel becomes a strategic partner, not just a contract reviewer. If you're enjoying this series, please share, hit subscribe, and share with a friend or fellow founder, and be in touch with any questions you had. Shefali, let's get started. Could you give us a little bit of background about yourself and what it means to you to be a general counsel?
Yeah, of course. So thank you so much for having me on. I am a law firm owner. I started my law firm, Lakhani Legal, a little over a year ago. The work I do is a mix of fractional GC work and a little bit of outside counsel work. And I'm happy to explain the differences in those two things too. But essentially, general counsel is a strategic legal advisor to the business. They help mitigate risk. They try to understand the business goals and align the legal strategy to those goals. So they might do things like review contracts, your assets, help review IP assets, do licensing agreements, answer employment questions, help you through your fundraising, your acquisition process, and everything in between. And oftentimes they might not have all of these skill sets, but they might be overseeing the project. So there are good folks to have to bring in outside counsel. And outside counsel is generally someone who might come and help your business on like a one-off setting. So maybe you just need someone to help sell your company or to like bring on another company. You're doing like a strategic acquisition and you might have an outside M&A counsel. Or you maybe need someone to trademark a bunch of your brand assets. And so you might just have trademark counsel. It really depends on, sort of how your company works with lawyers, how big they are, and sort of what their business goals are. Not just like a one-off person, but really that strategic person that'll guide your business through big decisions.
Amazing. But so if I'm a small firm, or like say I'm actually just a lot of the people who were at the same event that we met in, and I just am starting like a small business, do I need to have legal involved in any way?
Yeah, I mean, I tell folks to bring our legal in as early as possible, right? Like, if you bring someone in down the line to help clean up your mess, that's inevitably going to be much more expensive than just doing it right from the start. Even if you are not sure on like the type of entity to set up, like maybe you're not sure where to register your business, maybe you are bringing on like a contractor right away, maybe you need a customer contract. You might not need someone ongoing, but it's helpful to at least talk to a lawyer at the beginning.
Definitely. And can people come to you for these types of services if they're like, hey, we kind of have this idea, it's starting to work, we want to get like started in a more serious way? Like, can they engage with you in that way? Like, oh, maybe we need a little bit of this. We need to like set up the entity. We need a couple of trademarks. We need a couple of contracts on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. So I work with small businesses and startups, essentially at every stage of growth. So whether you're just starting out and you need help with formation, to contract drafting, IP assistant, you're raising money, all the way to exit and everything in between. I work on one-off projects, so I might be your outside counsel when you're just starting out and you don't need someone on a as much of an ongoing basis. And then I also work with companies that are a little bit more established and maybe they do need someone who understands their business and can provide a little bit more strategic guidance on an ongoing basis.
I love this piece of like strategic. Like for me, pre having my own business, I was like, oh, like you call the lawyer when you have a problem. Like that's like completely what was like in my head. Like, and I was like, I don't want to talk to the lawyer because I feel like that means we have a problem or I'm going to get in trouble for something. Like I was just like, oh no. So I think I had like a different approach. I was like younger, I feel like, and had less resources whenever I started like working on my own in the beginning. And I was like, oh, like who needs any of that? And I think we had a little bit of the situation where like then we like had to do a lot of cleanup afterwards. Oh, we actually need this type of contract. Oh, we need like an employee handbook. Oh, there was a lot of pieces. And in retrospect, many times I've like said to like my business manager, it would have been so much easier if I would have just like started in this place to like understand. I think that's part of like what we wanted to do with this series is like just have a quick snapshot that people could listen to on the end of like, okay, how do you build your team? And for me, there's obviously all different levels of business, but I think it's interesting to think about this. Like, okay, whenever you're building, no matter what size you are, what's your support team, right? And like
Yeah.
how much you actually need those to like grow a successful business. So could you, just to understand a little bit more where you started and where you are now, could you give us a little bit of your like background so everyone knows a little bit more about like what your journey's been?
Yeah, definitely. So I started my career in like a pretty traditional sense. So I worked at a couple different law firms in New York, in Atlanta, and there just wasn't something that didn't quite click at those law firms, like the culture, the way sort of they're organized, and the expectations that are set, and the type of clients that you get to work with. I knew that wasn't quite for me in the long term, and in the back of my mind I always knew I wanted to do something entrepreneurial. It was just a matter of what and when. So I completely pivoted for a couple of years, and I worked in the legal tech space, I worked in the fintech space, solving big interesting problems. But, all the while there was this like nagging, like, I need to work for myself feeling. And when I thought about building a law firm, I knew I could get a lot of the things that I wanted out of a career. So I could have that flexibility, I could have that autonomy, I could get to work with whoever I wanted in a
Yeah.
manner that felt authentic to me and the client. And I knew I could have some sort of impact, right? Like I think a lot of times when we think of impact, we think like curing cancer or building like the next unicorn app. But it doesn't have to be that way. I can create impact by supporting folks like yourself, supporting other businesses that are building incredible things, that are, supporting their communities, that have their own impact. I can support them, I can educate them, and I can hopefully help guide them to help grow and sustain their businesses. So that's how Lakhani Legal started. It's been a great journey since then over the last like year plus.
Amazing, amazing. I love that. No, I think it's like interesting as well. Like I think whenever you build something yourself as well, right? You like get to build your own community. Just like not that you're not stuck in a community that's like defined by like where you're working. And I think once you get into it, you see like, oh, there's like an amazing network. It feels like there's a lot of women in business who are like looking to make those connections, which I think is surprising because it feels crazy that there's still like two like separate buckets really of like female founded and like other. But I feel like since it's still how the landscape looks, it's very nice to lean in, I think, and like build a community around that.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I found. And I found like the female founders that I've met to be so supportive and so willing to share anything that they've learned through their
No,
journeys.
same. Same. And you know what else I think is interesting is something you hit on is that everyone said it's like every single person who we've like had a pre-interview with or an interview with for this podcast, everyone's talked about problem solving, which is
Mhm.
interesting because everyone through a different angle or a different lens, but everyone likes to solve problems and everyone likes to support business and everyone likes to see growth. So I feel like that's like very interesting. I think it's also, I was speaking to another guest and she was saying, I'm like very good at understanding the puzzle quickly within
Yeah.
like different organizations, which I feel like if you're running a law firm, right, it's the same thing, right? Because you have a lot of different clients or you're working like fractional, like I'm guessing whenever you work, which I want to get into, whenever you work on a fractional basis, it's normally like a retained client, correct? Is that how you guys work?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. Some people like don't call it fractional, but they'll just come back over and over again. But
Yeah.
ideally, what we do when something like that happens is try to build something that works for their schedule. So that might be like, let's do, based on like how we've been working the past few months, it looks like you might need X number of hours a month. Let's try to find
Yeah.
a retainer, a package that works for you. Or these are like the three big projects that are coming for you over the next quarter. Let's build something, basically a retainer or subscription package around that. So
Yeah.
it's really based on the client needs and how we've worked together and what we see to be coming down the pipeline in the coming months.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I think as well you hit on an interesting point. I don't find that it's the customers normally. I think that there's people who are looking for like a fractional CFO felt like really a thing, but now like so many other fractionals available. In my experience as well, we're never working as like fractionals, but by
Yeah,
definition, what we do, we always work by retainer. But it's exactly what you're saying. Like it's about like how it's been repackaged and like
yeah,
marketed, right? And like, oh, people are building businesses. I think as well, it's like with this like shift in like what the like work environment looks like and what like employees and like people like are looking for in their careers, what that looks like. Kind of
yeah,
package it as this like fractional. I feel like it's become very buzzy and also it puts you in a clear bucket of like, oh, okay, like you can treat me like I'm an in-house employee, I'm going to understand your business like that, but I'm
Yeah.
going to step in and step out, which is very good for both sides.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
yeah, no, I think it's great. But I think it's interesting because it hadn't really occurred to me how much of that was happening and like how it was like just a bigger marketplace trend. And so speaking of this and like customers, I like to talk to everyone about this, like the juggling. Obviously, you're working across like separate businesses, and I think whenever we talked pre-recording about this, you were like, "Well, I don't know that we have a perfect system for that," which I think is the same for everyone. A
Yeah.
couple of people I know have like a very strict system, but like in my instance, like a strict system wouldn't like work very well for our business. So I
Yeah.
think, how do you manage your time or like currently? And is
Yeah.
there a goal of like how you'd like to see it managed?
Yeah. So right now, I mean, you're right. It's really hard to have a strict system because you don't know when emergencies are going to pop up or people are going to call you and sort of like invade, right? Like that, the deep work hours that you've put aside. What I like to do in theory is at least have one day for deep work. That way,
Okay.
like when client work has come in, I could just heads down, not think about getting any calls, whether it's client calls or networking, and just get shit done. On the other days, I like to have like mornings for work and later in the day for calls, but that doesn't always work, right? Inevitably, I also end up talking to people from different time zones. Like I've had to talk to people from the Middle East, from China, and that's not going to work. And so
Yeah.
that's the ideal, but it's always flexible. And I think in working with businesses, things ebb and flow. One business might be, doing a big product launch or raising money or have a lot of work to do for like a couple of months. And then they might be quiet for a little bit. And so that's really helpful to me because then in that time period, I might be really supporting, that client and working with them. And then, when their project finishes, I can shift my focus to a couple of different things. And that's the really nice thing about being fractional.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I like this as well. Like we also try and like batch work and then like have this as well, like definitely like designated because it feels like especially like, in this like Zoom environment, you could sit on Zoom calls all day long, especially when you're trying to grow a business and you're trying to network and you're doing like, you're trying to like fill up your like client roster. That's a lot of work, but I feel like you also have to have the time where you're just like heads down. So we also have a system of like how the calendars are blocked so that every day there's like definitely and there's like one full day where like you're not even expected to like answer emails because just between keeping up with the Zoom calls, I feel like the Zoom calls, the networking, and the emails is like a full-time job.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, but do you have a strict like no working outside of normal office hours? Is that like what the goal is?
That's the long-term goal. I will say I have a hard time enforcing it, especially because my business is still fairly new and I always
Yeah.
feel like there's something to do, like whether it is client work, but then there's also like all of the other work of building a business, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, networking, finding new ways to market, LinkedIn, social media. And so there's always going to be something or another, but that's the goal down the line is to like have a hard cutoff and say, right, like after X PM, like I'm not going to do this anymore.
Yeah. No, because I always say the same things. Like there's the building the business piece, which is like a full-time job.
Yeah.
And then I had like made the comment many times, but then I was like I've also been like a full-time employee of the business.
Yeah.
Like I'm
Yeah.
the creative director and I feel like but also making sure all the business stuff gets like managing both pieces and like that it grows with your vision. It's sometimes hard to like condense it within like a normal workday. I know some of the people who we spoke with, it's been interesting because a lot of people are happy to have like after hours, like calls, which is interesting. I thought because they were saying some people's experience, it's been mine as well, that like when you're like in this like C-suite world, like a lot of people are tied up during the day and they don't have time to think until the evening or in the early morning, like when they're at the gym or they want like they want no other interruption. So they want to take a call on the weekend. And I think it's also like interesting as well because then you have to make sure you block out time to like
Yeah.
compensate for it during like normal working hours. I feel like it's like this word sounds cliche, but it's like always a balance.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like, how do you integrate your building your business, running your business into your life? Because I think
Yeah.
it's incredibly difficult to be like, this is like one part of my life and this is another part of your life. I think you have to
Yeah.
find ways to integrate them.
I think that's like such a good point. I think that it makes it easier to do that if you like love what you do. I mean, in
Yeah.
my case, it was easy because in the early days, it involved a lot of like shopping and traveling, which I think is like much different than working at a law firm. But it was great because I could just use like it as an excuse to like shop, go to like restaurants, travel around, see new things, and catch
Yeah.
all the latest trends. Unfortunately, the like internet ruined that for me, but there was a time whenever it was great to have them completely meshed.
Oh my God, that sounds like an incredible time.
It was a good run. It was a good run. Okay, so let's make it real for listeners. What's the biggest mindset shift founders need to make when it comes to legal, and how do they go? Like, what it's like one hint of how you could think about a couple of like things you could put in place so that instead of having to be reactive, you could be strategic.
I mean, I think like to your earlier point, right? Like I think everyone often thinks of legal as like, oh, I messed something up and now I have to fix it, or
Yeah.
shit hit the fan and now I have to fix it. But I think if you think of legal as an investment rather than a cost center, that'll enable your growth. For example, like if you decide to get a trademark early on, you can scale your company and brand in peace without having to infringe on third-party rights. So if there's like a
Totally.
new like state or geography that you want to expand into, you can do that in peace without thinking like, I wonder if there's this brand in South Carolina or this brand in whatever. If you have like, for example, a lawyer review your contracts, you can again like know that your assets are protected, your IP is protected. You can terminate the contract. You know that you are building this relationship on a good foundation. That hopefully issues won't arise down the line, and you won't have to like untangle any problems.
Yeah.
Or you could put like an employee handbook in place, and so employees are clear as to what the expectations are, what's allowed and not allowed in a company without, again, like having to deal with the fallout later on. A lot of it's like, how do we prevent dealing with the fallout or issues, and how do we deal with it up front?
No, I love that. And I think as I mentioned earlier, I've learned a lot of those like lessons, but I think the same problems come up in everyone's business at
Yeah.
some point or the other, right? And within your own business, probably multiple times. So I think if you have a framework, like a legal framework, right, that you can always go back to and be like, okay, this is like, here's how we handle this. Here's what's going on. Here's where we have the protection. And I think, I think, and I'm interested to hear what your take is on this, because I have a hot take on it as well. I feel like there's a lot of like websites now that you can go to where it's like, download this contract, like download. I feel like I'm positive about, but I'm sure there's what's the worst case scenario when you use one of these?
Yeah, I don't like them. And I know unfortunately a lot of lawyers put out these contract templates, and I do know a lot
Yeah.
of the lawyers that do will help you review it, but generally I think it's a terrible idea to pull a template off like online or take someone else's template and use it as your own without having a lawyer ever look at it. A contract really works only if it's customized to your specific business, right? Because
Yeah.
the way we draft contracts is I usually sit down with the client, we'll kind of discuss what the thing is, what's involved in that relationship, and then make sure that those things are thought about in the contract. So if you don't have someone thinking about like your cash flow, your IP, your payment structure, like when you would get out of the contract and you're just pulling something from online, inevitably, it might work well for like 10 people, but there's always going to be like that 11th or 50th or 100th person where
Yeah.
someone's going to like bring up some issue, and then it's not going to be in your contract and you're going to have to deal with that.
Yeah. I think a worst case scenario I've seen from this is that there's like a lot of these online like templates available. The worst I've seen is like a cut and paste of them. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've seen this, like
Yes.
where like so, and then you're like, I've been presented with a few of those where it was so obvious that it was like pieced together, and you were like, and then some of the verbiage isn't changed, and then someone who's
Yeah.
not a lawyer tries to write on top of it, and you're
Yeah.
like, oh my goodness, like this is a hot mess. So
Yeah.
no, it feels like it's like I like this a lot of like what you said, like if you like think about it as like an investment as you would in all the other investments in your business instead of like a cost center, like an
Yeah.
investment in the future success, I think is a great way to frame it.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, we have a term for that.
Oh yeah, tell me.
Frankensteining a contract.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I won't say who in this podcast has been guilty of that, but I'm guessing you can imagine which one of us it was. And it didn't, you know what the crazy thing is? One, it didn't work out well. Two,
Yeah.
it was like just like my like lack of like experience. And two, it cost a lot of money to get everything fixed. Like it would have been so much cheaper just to do everything right in the beginning.
Yeah.
So I'm a big advocate. I feel like in my early days, I was afraid of two people. That was like anyone who was sitting like in accounts, bookkeeping, or finance, and anyone in legal. My like creative brain was like, stay away from me. Like I just felt like I was like getting called into like the principal's office. I've changed my tune now and learned a
Yeah.
lot, but I think it was just like lack of like experience and like being a little bit like naive. And I think if you just sometimes you know what you know, but you don't know what you don't know. So there's always sometimes some painful learning curves.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
speaking of learning curves, so let's do a quick round of rapid fire insights from a
Yes.
founder. So for you, 3 legal touch points. I should be checking my business every month or every quarter.
These things that I'm going to mention maybe doesn't have to be every month, but definitely on some version of a regular basis. So,
Yeah.
for example, contracts, like we were just talking about. I think a lot of people, have that contract template and they're like, great, we're good to go. We never need to look at this again. That's not the case. Like, inevitably, your business is going to grow. You might have new offerings. You might have contractors. Whatever might be the case, you're going to need to update that contract, whether it is your business or a regulation that changes. So making sure you come back to that on a regular basis. The other thing is just generally making sure you have good legal hygiene. So, right, like as your business grows, you're entering into contracts with lots of different people. So there's like renewals and deadlines. So making sure you calendar everything. If you have like an LLC or a corporation, right, you're going to have annual reports due. If you have a trademark, you're going to have renewals. So like making sure that all of this is like calendared somewhere, papered somewhere, so that you're on top of these things and something doesn't lapse where it doesn't need to. And then the other big thing I like to tell folks is like some version of a regular IP audit. So,
Yeah.
as your company changes, do you have new brand assets? Have you created new proprietary technology? Are you making sure that everyone that's working for you is still signing the relevant language? Does your IP strategy still like generally align with your business and long-term goals?
Great. That's really helpful. And I think we're always like interested in this like behind the curtain. What is like one mistake you see over and over again that you're like, you could have prevented this? What's the
We
biggest one?
I mean, we just talked about this, but like contracts
Okay.
either that are like downloaded from the internet or like even worse, like you have a contract that someone hasn't looked at, like you didn't have a lawyer look at it. I've dealt with a number of clients at this point where they didn't have a client look at it or they didn't have a lawyer look at it. Something happened and now they have to like, negotiate some sort of settlement. They're paying like more lawyers' fees. They're probably paying some termination fees. They've lost a lot of money because like things didn't work out as they should have. So contracts, unfortunately, that's like my blanket answer. But
Yeah, no, it's good. Just like contracts. But I'm guessing contracts on both sides, right? Like with clients and with like employees, like all contracts,
oh,
like
yeah,
a 360 of contracts.
yeah, like customers, vendors, employees, leases. Like you have like 1,500 business relationships, and you probably have entered into a ton of contracts. So all of those are incredibly important.
As a trend forecaster, I need to ask all of our guests, like one trend you see in your business stream happening. So one, like what's the latest trend in like legal and like risk or like this idea of like risk mitigation? Are people like looking to mitigate risk? Are people feeling risky? What do you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are looking to mitigate risk. I think I'm gonna kind of squash a couple different trends here together, but
Oh, okay.
I think like the market share of like solos and small firms is growing for a few different reasons.
Yeah.
One, I think people really care about like are more values aligned in who they worked with. So I think it's much easier to understand and be values aligned with like someone who's coming from a smaller firm. And for me, it's easier for me to share my values and educate people, whether it's on LinkedIn and social media. They are much more inclined to reach out to those lawyers and mitigate risk early on. And so I think as a virtue of like social media and LinkedIn and Instagram or TikTok or whatever, There's much more legal education out there. Like people are learning about contracts, people are learning about trademarks. And so I think people are reaching out more and more earlier and earlier to work with lawyers.
I think that makes sense because I think as well there's like a lot of people who find themselves like because of social media and because of like everyone's like side hustle. Sometimes people are seeing incredible growth incredibly quickly, right? And like what to do with it. So, and I think that there's like a lot of opportunities, right, for entrepreneurs right now and like self-founded or like individuals even. So I think as well, I think like everything, right? The all of the curtains have kind of been pulled back and now you can see like into like, oh, here's what it looks like to work with a lawyer. Here's what it looks like to work with a CFO. Here's what it looks like to like work with all these different people. And I think there is like a lot of like education going on and access that there like wasn't before.
Yeah, yeah, it's fantastic. I love it.
So we end every episode with a little flavor. So first, what's your favorite taco?
Birria.
Okay, fantastic, fantastic. And what's a tip you take from your like from your professional life into your personal life as like the general counsel of your personal life? What's that look like?
In my job, I'm like looking to mitigate your risk and evaluate risk constantly. And so that inevitably seeps into my personal life for better or for worse. So
Yeah.
I'm always like thinking about what if and playing out situations in my head. And that's a good thing because it helps me think strategically, but sometimes you just like don't need to think strategically about like where you're going to dinner. So it's a blessing and a curse.
Definitely, definitely. And lastly, where can our listeners find you, follow your work, or get in touch?
I'm most active on LinkedIn, so if you want to reach out, Shefali Lakhani. I'm also on Instagram at Lawyer Shefali. My website is lakhanilegal.com, and you can go there, learn about my services, book a consultation, or just reach
Amazing.
out if you want to chat.
Perfect. And we'll leave all of your contact information in the notes below so everyone can get a hold of you that way as well.
Okay, awesome. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much. This was fun, and we'll talk soon.